Today's episode is about Waris Dirie's fascinating journey from desert nomad to high fashion model. Please note that today's episode has some strong language and graphic topics, so if you have some little ones around, maybe you better watch this episode at another time. Okay, please do yourself a favor. Pick up a copy of this book. Her autobiography, Desert Flower, is absolutely unbelievable. It's simply extraordinary. She grew up a desert nomad in Somalia, a lifestyle so far removed from most of our experiences that it's just fascinating to read about her childhood. She and her family would move every 3 to 4 weeks in search of food and water, and they would take all of their possessions with them, which included a herd of animals, which would be camels, goats, cattle, and they were used for trade or to carry things, and most importantly for their milk. They rarely ate meat, and she says they went to bed without supper a lot of nights if they couldn't find anything, but for breakfast they usually had camel's milk. And just her description of how in tune with nature she was in navigating by the sun and finding water and protecting her flock, knowing when the rain is coming. And maybe the most peculiar thing, at least for me, it's hard to imagine in our modern day society, but they have a very different concept of time. She doesn't know her exact age, and although she provides guesses for chronological purposes in the book, she says that they only lived in the now, concentrating on that day's work. So she never thought about the past, she never thought about the future, she never thought to ask her parents about their past. It was all about right now. Another part of this lifestyle and this culture was the disparity between men and women. She was molested by her father's friend when she was only 4 years old, and she kind of mentions in passing that probably the same thing happened to her sister when a man came into their camp. Her father ended up taking a second, very young wife, which sort of shocked everybody, she says, in her family, even though it was very customary for men to have more than one wife in these Somalian tribes. But really, the most shocking thing was this notion that girls have to be fixed before marriage. In a process that we know as female genital mutilation, the girl's clitoris, labia minora, and part of the labia majora are cut off and then sewn shut until marriage, essentially to prove to the husband that he's getting a virgin. And it's difficult to understand how this is still happening, but Waris says it's explained as this very special ritual to girls, like it's marketed that way as something that you want done to yourself. She herself wanted to become a woman so much that she convinced her parents to have this done to her at the age of 5. Of course, all while having no idea what the actual process entails. She just knew that her sisters and other women would leave camp for a while and come back, and they were a woman after this very special rite of passage. I mean, all she knew is that she was tired of being mistreated as men hurled these insults at her. They would call her dirty little girl or unsanitary slut, and she thought the only way to make that stop was to be clean and become a woman, and that was through this process. But there are very real dangers to this practice. She describes how this gypsy woman came and just used a dirty razor blade to cut, followed by a thorn to puncture holes in the skin and then sew everything up. Then her legs were bound for over a month while she healed, and what was left was such a small hole that she had trouble going to the bathroom and then eventually menstruating. Many girls die from this practice. Many die from shock, infection, blood loss, and even years later having trouble with their period getting backed up in their system. Just a very dangerous and painful situation for life, but we'll get to all of that. When she was about 13 years old, her father found a man for her to marry, and she says, quote, he was at least 60 years old with a long white beard. Her father was essentially trying to sell her to this man for marriage for 5 camels. She decided that the only way to escape this fate was going to be to run away, which she did, but there was nothing for miles, so she ran for days and was exhausted and hungry, and she stopped a lot to take naps. And there's this one moment where she wakes up face to face with a lion, and she thought she's done for, and in that moment was ready to die. But eventually the lion left, and she thought, God must have a bigger plan for me, so please just direct me, show me the way. And she got her strength to go a little while longer and came across an area with camels and nursed directly from the camel until a herdsman came and yelled at her and actually ends up lashing her a couple of times before she can get away. And there are just so many more details in this book. Please grab a copy just to hear about everything she went through, just overcoming all of these obstacles until she arrived at the capital of Somalia, where she knew that her aunt was living, and she eventually found her and worked to take care of her aunt's children and the household until one day a different uncle came to talk to the aunt. She overheard their conversation. He was to be the Somalian ambassador to England, so he was moving to London and needed a maid, and she begged her aunt to recommend her for the job, and that's how she ended up flying to London. So in this part, it's so great. Because of her background, there are just so many firsts, so the description of that is amazing. But this is her first time seeing up close a plane, being on an airplane, seeing a toilet flush, not figuring that out, escalators, and snow. It was snowing in London when she got there, which was nothing she'd ever seen before. But my favorite part was this is her first time seeing white people. And she says that she thought she's never seen a white person before, and she's so puzzled by it. She's like, they looked cold and sickly, like this was some kind of temporary condition and they just needed some sun. Which, of course, I just love that. So she lived with her uncle and his family in London while he was the ambassador. And even though she was family, she was basically treated like a servant for those 4 years. But during that time, she was introduced to and fell in love with modeling, because the famous Somalian model Iman was a daughter of her aunt's friend. And she thought, if she's a Somali woman and can do this, why can't I? So okay, the 4 years are up, her uncle's term is done, and they're going to go back to Somalia. But she wants to stay, so she buries her passport in the backyard and tells them that she can't find it, so they'll just have to leave her there. So she's in London by herself, doesn't know anybody, has no job, no place to live, and very little money. But she strikes up a conversation with a woman that she recognizes as Somali, and the woman offers her a place to stay that night, and she ends up getting a very cheap place at the YWCA and working at a McDonald's. Waris says that they hire a lot of illegal immigrants to work in the back of the McDonald's, and because they don't have to pay them minimum wage. So let's go back a little. 2 years into working for her uncle, she started walking her little cousin to school, and a man noticed her, and from her previous experiences, she thought, this is a perverted stalker, we need to avoid him at all costs. Because he tried to talk to her, and then he came to the house and tried to talk to the aunt, and she was furious that he asked to take her picture, but he finally gave Waris his business card and then left her alone, and she held on to that card for years. So now fast forward, working in the McDonald's, and she sees this man again. He speaks to her again, so she decides to have her friend, who has better English, call him and see what does he want. He explains that he is Malcolm Fairchild, a photographer, and he wants to take her picture. He wanted a picture of her profile he thought was very unique and beautiful. She finally agrees to do this. He takes the picture, and an agency sees it and wants to work with her, and everything kind of spirals from there. She ends up booking the Pirelli calendar with a very young Naomi Campbell, then a bit part in a James Bond film as a Bond girl, and other modeling jobs in Europe and New York. But she frequently has immigration issues. One time she borrows a friend's passport. She actually goes through 2 very complicated marriages in order to obtain passports. She knows that there isn't this kind of future for her in Somalia, so she's willing to do anything to stay here and continue this modeling path that's working out. But back to the problems she was having with her period. She describes the female genital mutilation as leaving only a pinhole after you're sewn up, so urination and menstruation are very difficult and actually complete agony. She often fainted when she got her period because of blood buildup. She went to doctors for the problem, but they just gave her birth control meds because they didn't really know what the problem was, and of course those didn't work, so she got off of those, and she finally told a doctor about her circumcision. He was stunned and said she needed surgery immediately, but there was still this cultural stigma that came with being from Somalia, and this is what it meant to be a woman. So she waited another 2 years before she did anything about it, and finally told a friend of hers at the Y, and had this moment of realization where she kind of already knew, but it was confirmed that this didn't happen to other women. It hadn't happened to her friend, and her friend was in complete shock, and they cried, and she said, I will take you to have this surgery done. Afterwards, she says she's in complete awe that she can pee freely. She says, quote, there's no way to explain what a new freedom that was. And I include all of this because I can't even imagine this. She's been suffering this way since she was 5. And this happens to so many girls. I just feel it's really important to explain what's really happening, even if it's graphic and uncomfortable to learn about. So finally, with all her modeling success and this transformation from desert nomad to high fashion model, BBC calls and says they want to make a documentary about her. She agreed to do it if They would help her find her mom in Somalia. She hadn't seen her mom in 15 years. There was war in Somalia, so they would have to bring the family over the border to Ethiopia. So it was a very difficult process, but they ended up finding her mom. Waris was kind of sad and surprised to see how the aging process had taken a toll on her. She asked her to come please live with her, and she said she can't do that because the dad's new wife had 5 children and then also ran away. So she was left taking care of them. Back in New York, she fell in love with a jazz drummer and they had a baby boy, Alik. She became a special UN ambassador and still fights the practice of female genital mutilation. She says, quote, "Not hundreds, not thousands, but millions of girls are living with it and dying from it. It's too late to change my own circumstances. The damage has already been done. But maybe I can help save somebody else." I want to read a bit of a longer passage from her book just to really put this in perspective. Female circumcision, or as it is more aptly referred to today, female genital mutilation, FGM, occurs predominantly in 28 countries in Africa. The UN estimates that this practice has been performed on 130 million girls and women. At least 2 million girls are at risk each year of being the next victims. That's 6,000 a day. The operations are usually performed in primitive circumstances by a midwife or village woman. They use no anesthetic. They'll cut the girl using whatever instruments they can lay their hands on. Razor blades, knives, scissors, broken glass, sharp stones, and in some regions, their teeth. The process ranges in severity by geographic location and cultural practice. The most minimal damage is cutting away the hood of the clitoris, which will prohibit the girl from enjoying sex for the rest of her life. At the other end of the spectrum is infibulation, which is performed on 80% of the women in Somalia. This was the version I was subjected to. The aftermath of infibulation includes the immediate complications of shock, infection, damage to the urethra or anus, scar formation, tetanus, bladder infections, septicemia, HIV, and hepatitis B. Long-term complications include chronic and recurrent urinary and pelvic infections that can lead to sterility, cysts and abscesses around the vulva, painful neuromas, increasingly difficult urination, dysmenorrhea, the pooling of menstrual blood in the abdomen, frigidity, depression, and death. The numbers haven't gone down since the writing of this book. In fact, they've gone up with population increases. So now 200 million females have undergone FGM, and over 3 million girls are at risk each year. To learn more about female genital mutilation and how you can help spread awareness and stop this practice, please go to the World Health Organization website. I've put a direct link below. And thank you so much for watching this video. I would love it if you would share it with someone and help others learn about Waris Dirie's inspiring story. And I'll see you guys next time for another 50 Shades of Great.